The scream that echoed through the abandoned mine shaft had long since died in Josephine Zeller's throat, replaced by the hoarse whispers of a woman who knew that no one would hear her cries. 3 days had passed since William Decker and his gang had led her deep into the labyrinthine tunnels of the Copper Queen mine outside Tombstone, Arizona territory, and left her to die punishment for refusing to sell her late father's land claim. It was 1882, and at 22 years old, Josephine had never imagined this would be how her life would end. The darkness was absolute, a living thing that pressed against her eyes until she wasn't sure if they were open or closed. The water from her canteen had run dry the previous day, and the few strips of jerky she'd had in her pocket were gone. Her blonde hair hung in dirty tendrils around her face, and her once pretty blue dress was torn and filthy from her desperate attempts to find a way out. "Help," she whispered, the word barely audible even to her own ears. "Someone, please." Josephine pressed her back against the cold stone wall, sliding down until she sat on the damp ground. Her father had been a miner before he passed 6 months ago, leaving her the claim that was supposedly worthless until gold had been discovered in the neighboring property. Now, it seemed, her refusal to sell to the mining company had cost her everything. She closed her eyes, conserving what little strength she had left, and tried not to think about the skittering sounds of small creatures moving in the darkness. Quentin Ellis had been tracking the Decker gang for 2 weeks. As a bounty hunter, who had earned a reputation across the Arizona territory for being as relentless as he was honorable, he had sworn to bring the outlaws to justice after they'd robbed the Bisbee stagecoach and killed the driver, a man who had once saved Quentin's life during an Apache raid. His tall, lean frame was silhouetted against the setting sun as he dismounted from his dun stallion at the entrance to the abandoned mine shaft. The tracks he'd been following had led him here, clear as day to a man who had spent half his 30 years learning to read the desert like a book. The gang had come this way, and they'd had someone with them, someone who walked with smaller footprints. A woman, from the look of it. Quentin adjusted his dark Stetson and checked his Colt Peacemaker before lighting a lantern. The desert night was beginning to fall, bringing with it a chill that would soon make the daytime heat seem like a distant memory. He whistled softly to his horse. "Wait here, Duke," he said, patting the animal's flank. "I won't be long." The mine entrance yawned before him like the mouth of a monster, the weathered support beams creaking softly in the evening breeze. Quentin knew the dangers of these old mines' cave-ins, poisonous gases, unexpected drops, but something told him that whatever he was about to find inside was important. The Decker gang had come here for a reason, and then left. But had they left alone? He stepped into the darkness, lantern held high, his spurs making a soft, jingling sound that echoed faintly through the tunnels. The air grew cooler and damper as he made his way deeper, following the obvious trail of bootprints in the dirt. After about 20 minutes of careful navigation through increasingly narrow passageways, he paused. The tracks split here, most continued forward, but 2 sets turned down a side tunnel going deeper. Quentin hesitated, then followed the smaller group. His instincts rarely led him astray. The tunnel grew tighter, the ceiling lower, forcing him to duck his head. The air became stale and his lantern light cast eerie, dancing shadows on the rock walls. Then he froze, listening. Had that been a whimper? "Hello," he called, his deep voice reverberating through the passage. "Anyone down here?" Silence answered him, then a faint shuffling sound. Quentin moved forward more quickly now, holding the lantern higher. "I'm not here to hurt you," he called. "I'm looking for—" He rounded a corner and stopped abruptly. In the pool of amber light cast by his lantern, he saw her, a young woman, huddled against the wall, her dress torn and dirty, her face streaked with grime and tears. She raised a hand to shield her eyes from the sudden light, and he noticed the raw, bleeding scrapes on her wrists where she had clearly tried to free herself from bindings. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking from thirst. "Please don't leave me here." Quentin knelt beside her, setting the lantern on the ground. He uncorked his canteen and held it to her lips. "Drink slowly," he said gently. "Not too much at once." She took small sips, coughing a little as the water hit her parched throat. "What's your name, miss?" he asked, his voice softer than most would expect from a man with his weathered face and reputation. "Josephine," she managed. "Josephine Zeller. Miss Zeller, I'm Quentin Ellis. Did the Decker gang bring you here?" Her eyes widened in surprise. "Yes, how did you? I've been tracking them. They're wanted for murder and robbery." He looked around the dark tunnel. "How long have you been down here?" 3 days, I think. It's hard to tell." Her voice trembled. "They wanted my father's land claim. When I wouldn't sell, they brought me here." Tears welled in her eyes. "I thought I was going to die here." Quentin's jaw tightened with anger, but he kept his voice calm. "You're not going to die, Miss Zeller. I'm going to get you out of here." He helped her to her feet, but her legs buckled beneath her. Without hesitation, he swept her into his arms. She was light, too light, and she trembled against his chest. "I'm sorry," she murmured, embarrassed by her weakness. "Don't be," he said. "It's a miracle you're alive at all." As he turned to carry her back the way he had come, a low rumble shook the tunnel. Dust and small rocks began to rain down from the ceiling. "Hold on tight," Quentin said urgently, adjusting his grip on her and grabbing the lantern. He began to move quickly through the passage, ducking as larger chunks of rock began to fall. The rumbling grew louder, and suddenly the tunnel behind them collapsed with a deafening roar. They were thrown forward by the force of it, landing hard on the ground as darkness engulfed them. The lantern had gone out in the fall. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Quentin's voice came through the darkness, calm despite their situation. "Are you hurt?" "No," Josephine whispered. "Just scared." He found her hand in the darkness and squeezed it reassuringly. "We're going to be all right. I know these old mines have multiple exits. We just need to find another way out." "What if there isn't one?" Her voice was small with fear. In the pitch blackness, she couldn't see his face, but she felt him shift closer to her, his presence solid and somehow comforting despite being a stranger. "I'll never leave you," he said, his voice firm with conviction. "I promise you that, Miss Zeller. Whatever happens, we'll face it together, and I will get you out of here." Something in his tone made her believe him, despite the dire circumstances. This man, this stranger who had appeared like an answered prayer, would not abandon her to the darkness. "Call me Josephine," she said, finding a small smile despite everything. "I think being trapped in a mine together puts us beyond formalities, Mr. Ellis." "Quentin," he corrected, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "And you're right, though I can't say it's how I usually make acquaintances." Somehow, in the absolute darkness of the collapsed mine, Josephine felt the first stirring of hope. Quentin managed to relight the lantern after several attempts, the small flame illuminating their situation. The tunnel behind them was completely blocked with fallen rock and timber. Their only option was to move deeper into the mine and hope to find another exit. "Can you walk?" Quentin asked, helping Josephine to her feet. "I think so," she said, taking a tentative step. Her legs were wobbly but held her weight. "Just don't go too fast." Quentin offered his arm for support. "We'll take it slow. These old mines were often connected to others. There's bound to be another way out." As they moved deeper into the tunnels, Josephine found herself leaning more heavily on Quentin's arm. Despite her exhaustion and fear, she was intensely aware of him, the solid strength of his arm beneath her hand, The way he carefully guided her around obstacles, the gentle patience in his voice when he spoke. "How did you become a bounty hunter?" she asked, partly to distract herself from their predicament and partly out of genuine curiosity. Quentin ducked beneath a low-hanging beam before answering. "I was a deputy in Tucson for a while. When my wife died of fever 5 years ago, I couldn't stay in that town anymore. Too many memories." "I'm sorry," Josephine said softly. He nodded, his face half hidden in shadow. "After that, I found I had a knack for tracking. The territory marshal gave me my first bounty papers, and I've been doing it ever since." "And the Decker gang, why are you after them specifically?" Quentin's jaw tightened. "They killed a friend of mine, Sam Reynolds. He was driving the Bisbee stage when they robbed it last month." Josephine squeezed his arm sympathetically. "I'm sorry for your loss. My father died 6 months ago, that's why I'm alone with the claim. He always said there was gold on our land, but no one believed him. And now Decker and his gang think he was right," she nodded. "A week ago, the neighboring claim struck gold. Suddenly, everyone wanted to buy our land, especially the Copper Queen Mining Company. When I refused to sell, Decker and his men showed up, said they represented interested parties who wouldn't take no for an answer. They paused at a junction where the tunnel split in 3 directions. Quentin held the lantern higher, examining each option. "This way," he said, pointing to the right-hand tunnel. "Feel the air, it's moving slightly. That means there might be an opening somewhere ahead." As they continued, Josephine stumbled, her strength finally giving out. Quentin caught her before she fell. "I can't," she began, but he cut her off by sweeping her into his arms again. "You don't have to," he said simply, as if carrying her through miles of dark tunnels was the most natural thing in the world. Josephine rested her head against his shoulder, too exhausted to protest. "You're very kind, Quentin Ellis." "Not according to most who know me," he replied with a soft chuckle. "I have a reputation for being rather difficult." "Well, they're wrong," she murmured, her eyelids growing heavy despite their dangerous situation. He looked down at her, his expression softening. "Get some rest, Josephine. I'll wake you if I find a way out." Despite the discomfort and danger, she felt herself drifting off, lulled by the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear and the strange sense of safety she felt in his arms. When Josephine awoke, she was lying on the ground with Quentin's coat folded beneath her head. The lantern burned low nearby, and Quentin sat against the tunnel wall, his hat tipped forward over his eyes. For a moment, she simply watched him, taking in his features properly for the first time. He was handsome in a rugged way, with strong lines to his face and dark hair that curled slightly at the edges of his hat. A scar ran along his jawline, and his clothes were worn but clean. He looked like a man who had seen his share of hardship but hadn't let it break him. As if sensing her gaze, he lifted his head, pushing his hat back. "You're awake. How are you feeling?" "Better," she said, surprised to find it was true. "How long was I asleep?" "A few hours." "I found water." He nodded toward a small pool that had formed from dripping condensation. "It's clean enough. I filled the canteen." Josephine sat up slowly, accepting the water he offered. "Did you sleep at all?" "I'll sleep when we're out of here," he said, though the shadows beneath his eyes told her he was exhausted. "You should rest. I can keep watch for a while." He shook his head. "We need to keep moving. The lantern oil won't last forever." As they continued their journey through the winding tunnels, Josephine learned more about the man who had found her in the darkness. He had grown up on a small ranch near Tucson, the son of a cattleman who had taught him to track and hunt. He had been married for 3 years before losing his wife to typhoid fever. He spoke little of that time, but the pain was evident in his voice. In turn, she told him about her father, a dreamer who had chased mining claims across 3 territories, before settling on the plot outside Tombstone. She told him about growing up learning to pan for gold instead of hosting tea parties, and how she had helped her father work the claim until his heart gave out one morning as he was heading into town. "He would have liked you," she said with a small smile. "He always said he wanted me to find a man who could read the land." Quentin glanced at her, a hint of surprise in his eyes. "Most women I've known prefer men who can read books." "I can read books myself," she replied. "But I can't track a man across 50 miles of desert or find water in a dried-up creek bed." They reached another junction, and Quentin paused, studying the options. Suddenly, he held up a hand for silence. Josephine froze, listening. "Water," he whispered. "Running water." He was right. A faint but distinct sound of flowing water came from the left-hand tunnel. Where there was running water, there might be a way out. They followed the sound, which grew louder as they progressed. The tunnel began to slope downward, and the air grew damper. Finally, they emerged into a larger chamber where a small underground stream flowed through a channel in the rock. "This has to lead somewhere," Quentin said, examining the flow. "Water always finds a way out." They followed the stream, their hope growing with each step. The tunnel widened and the ceiling rose until they could walk upright without ducking. The stream grew wider and faster. Then, amazingly, Quentin pointed ahead. "Look!" A faint bluish light shimmered in the distance. Daylight. They moved faster now, Josephine finding strength she didn't know she had left. The light grew brighter, revealing an opening where the stream flowed out of the mine and down a rocky slope. When they finally stepped out into the open air, Josephine felt tears spring to her eyes. The sun was just rising, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Never had a sunrise looked so beautiful. Quentin stood beside her, squinting against the light, a smile breaking across his weary face. "We made it." Impulsively, Josephine threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at the same time. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "Thank you for finding me." His arms closed around her, holding her securely. "I told you I wouldn't leave you," he said softly. They stayed that way for a long moment, both reluctant to break the embrace. When they finally parted, something had changed between them, a connection forged in darkness and sealed in the light of a new day. Quentin looked around, getting his bearings. "We're about 5 miles south of where we went in. My horse is probably long gone, but there's a small trading post not far from here. We can get help there." The walk to the trading post took them most of the morning. Josephine was weak from her ordeal, but the fresh air and sunlight revived her spirits, if not her strength. Quentin stayed close to her side, his hand supporting her elbow when the terrain grew rough, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for danger. The trading post was a simple affair, a low adobe building with a corral for horses and a windmill pumping water into a trough. An elderly man with a long white beard emerged as they approached, his eyes widening at their dusty, bedraggled appearance. "Lord Almighty, you two look like you've been through hell," he said, hurrying to help Josephine to a bench in the shade of the porch. "Not hell," Quentin replied, "just the Copper Queen mine." While Josephine rested and drank fresh water, Quentin explained their situation to the trader, who introduced himself as Ezekiel Morrow. "The Decker gang, you say?" Ezekiel shook his head. "Bad business, that. They were through here 2 days ago, headed for the border, I reckon. Nasty bunch." "I need to get Miss Zeller to Tombstone," Quentin said. "Can you lend us horses? I'll make sure they're returned." Ezekiel studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I know your reputation, Ellis. You're good for it." He glanced at Josephine. "The lady looks like she could use a proper meal and some rest before you head out, though." So it was that Josephine found herself sitting at Ezekiel's rough wooden table, eating a hearty stew while Quentin and the old trader discussed the best route back to Tombstone. "There's a shortcut through Apache Pass," Ezekiel was saying, "but with the lady along you might want to take the longer route through Bisbee. Safer that way." Quentin nodded, his gaze drifting to Josephine. "We'll take the Bisbee route. I don't want to risk any more trouble." They set out after Josephine had rested, mounted on two of Ezekiel's horse's sturdy Mustangs that knew the territory well. Quentin rode close beside her, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. He had acquired a rifle from Ezekiel in addition to his Colt, and Josephine felt safer knowing he was well armed. "What will you do when we reach Tombstone?" she asked as they rode. Quentin adjusted his hat against the afternoon sun. "Get you settled somewhere safe, then continue after Decker. He needs to answer for what he's done to you and to others." Josephine frowned. "They'll be expecting you to follow them. It could be a trap." "Wouldn't be the first one I've walked into," he said with a slight smile. "Don't worry about me, Josephine. I've been doing this a long time." She looked away, troubled by the thought of him facing the Decker gang alone. "What if I don't want you to go?" The question hung in the air between them, more revealing than she had intended. Quentin looked at her, surprise evident in his expression. "What are you saying?" Josephine took a deep breath. "I'm saying that I've lost too many people already. I don't want to lose you too, especially not after." She gestured vaguely, unable to put into words the connection that had formed between them in the darkness of the mine. Quentin rode in silence for a moment, his face unreadable. "I have a job to do," he said finally. "Those men need to be brought to justice." "I know," she said quietly. "I just wish it didn't have to be you doing it." They made camp that night in a small arroyo, sheltered from the wind and hidden from any passing riders. Quentin built a small fire and prepared a simple meal from supplies Ezekiel had provided. As they ate, the desert night closed around them, the stars emerging in the vast sky overhead. "It's beautiful," Josephine said, looking up at the glittering expanse. "After the darkness of the mine, I'll never take the stars for granted again." Quentin followed her gaze upward. "My father used to say that stars are the eyes of those who have gone before us, watching over the ones they left behind." "You believe that?" he considered for a moment. "I'd like to. It's a comforting thought." Josephine studied his profile in the firelight. "Do you ever get tired of being alone, Quentin?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He poked at the fire, sending sparks dancing upward. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But being alone is safer. No one to worry about, no one to lose. No one to love," she added softly. His eyes met hers across the fire, dark and unreadable. "That too." Josephine moved to sit beside him, drawn by a force she couldn't explain. "I think," she said carefully, "that might be a lonely way to live." "It is," he acknowledged, "but it's the choice I made after Sarah died." "And you never considered making a different choice?" Quentin looked at her for a long moment. "Not until recently." The words hung between them, full of unspoken meaning. Josephine felt her heart beating faster. Slowly, giving him time to pull away, she reached out and placed her hand over his. "I owe you my life," she said, "but what I'm feeling now has nothing to do with gratitude." Quentin turned his hand beneath hers, lacing their fingers together. "Josephine," he began, his voice rougher than usual, "I'm not the kind of man who can offer you much. My life is dangerous, unpredictable." "I'm not asking for promises," she said. "I'm just asking you not to shut yourself away from the possibility." He reached up with his free hand to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "You're a remarkable woman, Josephine Zeller." When he kissed her, it was tender and hesitant, as if he was afraid she might shatter. Josephine responded with a warmth that surprised them both, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they parted, Something had shifted between them, a door opening to a future neither had anticipated. "We should get some rest," Quentin said, his voice husky. "We have a long ride tomorrow." They reached Tombstone the following afternoon, the town appearing suddenly on the horizon like a mirage in the desert heat. The main street was bustling with activity, miners coming off shift, cowboys in town for supplies, ladies in fine dresses strolling beneath parasols to protect them from the harsh sun. Quentin led Josephine directly to the sheriff's office, where Sheriff Richard Morris listened with growing concern to their story. "Decker's gone too far this time," Morris said, shaking his head. "Abandoning a woman to die in a mine shaft. That's cold-blooded murder as far as I'm concerned, even if you did survive, Miss Zeller." "I want to file a formal complaint," Josephine said firmly. "They tried to steal my land and left me to die. They need to be brought to justice." The sheriff nodded, pulling out a form. "I'll telegraph the territorial marshal right away. In the meantime, Miss Zeller, you should see a doctor and get some proper rest." "I'll take her to the Grand Hotel," Quentin said. "She'll be safe there while I go after Decker." Josephine opened her mouth to protest, but Sheriff Morris spoke first. "Now hold on, Ellis. I can't let you go after them alone. Decker's got at least 5 men with him, all armed and dangerous." "I've handled worse," Quentin said grimly. "Maybe so, but I'm organizing a posse. We'll head out at first light tomorrow. I'd be obliged if you'd ride with us. We could use your tracking skills." Quentin hesitated, glancing at Josephine. "All right," he agreed finally. "Tomorrow at dawn." After leaving the sheriff's office, Quentin escorted Josephine to the town doctor, who pronounced her dehydrated and exhausted but otherwise unharmed. From there, they went to the Grand Hotel, where Quentin insisted on paying for a room for her despite her protests. "You need a proper place to rest," he said firmly as they stood in the hotel lobby. "I'll check on you tomorrow before I leave with the posse." Josephine caught his hand. "Where will you stay tonight? I'll find a room at the boarding house." She looked up at him, a decision forming in her mind. "Have dinner with me tonight, please," he agreed, and they arranged to meet in the hotel restaurant at 7. After Quentin left, Josephine used the last of her meager funds to purchase a new dress and have a bath drawn in her room. As she soaked in the warm water, washing away the dirt and fear of the past days, she thought about the bounty hunter who had found her in the darkness and brought her back to the light. She had known him for only 2 days, yet she felt connected to him in a way she couldn't explain. Was it simply gratitude, or something deeper? And what would happen when he rode out with the posse tomorrow? Quentin arrived at the restaurant precisely at 7, and Josephine's breath caught at the sight of him. He had cleaned up, shaved, and was wearing a fresh shirt and string tie with his usual denim pants and boots. His dark hair was neatly combed, and without the dust of the trail, she could see that his eyes were a deep blue-gray, like the sky before a storm. His own eyes widened slightly when he saw her in her new dress, a simple but elegant blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. "You look beautiful," he said simply as he pulled out her chair. Over dinner, they talked about everything except the danger that awaited the next day. Josephine told him more about her father and their life together, and Quentin shared stories of his childhood on the ranch. They discovered a shared love of books and music, and a similar outlook on life despite their different paths. As the evening progressed, Josephine found herself increasingly certain of her feelings. This man, who had appeared in her darkest hour and promised never to leave her, had awakened something in her heart that she hadn't known was sleeping. When they finally left the restaurant, standing in the hotel corridor outside her room, Josephine made her decision. "I don't want you to go to the boarding house," she said quietly, meeting his eyes. "Stay with me tonight. Quentin's expression softened. "Josephine, I don't expect anything from you. You don't owe me." She placed a finger against his lips, silencing him. "This isn't about owing or gratitude. This is about two people who found each other against all odds and what they might mean to each other if given the chance." He searched her face for a long moment, then gently took her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Are you sure?" In answer, she unlocked her door and let him inside. The morning came too quickly. Josephine woke to find Quentin already dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed watching her sleep. The gray light of dawn filtered through the curtains, painting the room in shades of silver. "You're leaving," she said, sitting up and pulling the sheet around her. He nodded, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "The posse gathers in an hour. When will you return?" "I don't know," he admitted. "It could be days, maybe weeks if they've crossed into Mexico." Josephine took his hand, pressing it against her cheek. "Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll come back." Quentin leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. "I promise," he whispered. "I found you in the darkness, Josephine. I'll always find my way back to you." After he left, Josephine spent the day taking stock of her situation. She went to the bank to inquire about her father's accounts and was relieved to find a small sum still available to her. It wouldn't last long, but it would give her time to decide what to do next. She also visited her father's claim office, where the deed to their property was registered. The clerk informed her that several inquiries had been made about the property in the past week, including one from the Copper Queen Mining Company. "Seems your land has suddenly become quite valuable, Miss Zeller," the clerk said with a knowing smile. "Funny how a little gold strike next door can change things." Josephine left the office deep in thought. If there really was gold on her father's land, she could develop the claim herself. It would require investment and hard work, but it would mean fulfilling her father's dream and giving herself a future in Tombstone. A future that, perhaps, could include a certain bounty hunter. Days turned into a week, and still the posse did not return. Josephine took a room at a more modest boarding house to conserve her funds, and found work at the town library, cataloging books and helping patrons. The librarian, a kindly widow named Mrs. Holloway, took Josephine under her wing, introducing her to other respectable women in town who might be willing to invest in a mining venture run by a woman. "It's unusual, certainly," Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, said during a tea gathering. "But not unheard of. There's a widow in Bisbee who's running her late husband's silver mine quite successfully. The real question," added Mrs. Thornton, who owned the town's largest dry goods store with her husband, "is whether you're prepared for the challenges." "Mining is a rough business, Miss Zeller." Josephine thought of the darkness of the mine shaft, of the fear and desperation she had felt, and of the strength she had found within herself to survive. "I'm tougher than I look," she said with a small smile, "and I learn quickly." By the time 10 days had passed with no word from the posse, Josephine had secured tentative interest from 3 potential investors and had hired a mining engineer to assess her father's claim. She kept busy during the days, but at night, alone in her room, she worried about Quentin. Had the posse encountered trouble? Had Decker and his gang ambushed them? Was Quentin lying wounded somewhere or worse? On the morning of the 12th day, Josephine was arranging books at the library when Mrs. Holloway hurried over to her. "Josephine, dear, they're back. The posse has returned to town." Josephine nearly dropped the book she was holding. "Are they all safe? Is Quentin—" "I don't know the details," Mrs. Holloway said. "I just heard they were riding in. You should go." Josephine needed no further encouragement. She rushed out of the library and down the main street toward the sheriff's office, her heart pounding. A small crowd had gathered, watching as a group of dusty, weary men dismounted from their horses. She scanned the faces anxiously, looking for Quentin. There was Sheriff Morris and Deputy Wilson, and several men she didn't recognize. But where was, and then she saw him, dismounting slowly from his horse at the edge of the group. He looked exhausted, with several days' growth of beard and a bandage wrapped around his left arm, but he was alive. "Quentin," she called, pushing through the crowd. He turned at the sound of her voice, and the weariness in his face gave way to a smile that transformed his features. In a few quick strides he reached her, and without caring who might see, Josephine threw her arms around him. "You came back," she whispered against his chest. His good arm tightened around her. "I promised I would." Later, after Quentin had given his report to the sheriff and had his wound a bullet graze from a shootout at the Mexican border properly tended by the doctor, they sat together on the porch of Josephine's boarding house. The evening was warm, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink as the sun set behind the distant mountains. "We got them all," Quentin said, his voice tired but satisfied. "Decker and 4 of his men will stand trial in Tucson next month. The territorial marshal is holding them personally." Josephine squeezed his hand. "I'm glad, not just for me, but for your friend the stage driver." "Sam would have appreciated it," Quentin agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then added, "The marshal offered me a job." Josephine looked at him in surprise. "What kind of job?" "Deputy U.S. Marshal. Said he could use a man with my tracking skills. It would mean a regular salary, a badge, a more respectable life." "Are you going to take it?" Quentin turned to face her, his expression serious. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether I have a reason to stay in one place." Josephine's heart quickened. "What kind of reason would you need?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, holding it in his palm. It was a rough gold nugget, about the size of a pea. "The engineer you hired found this on your claim yesterday," he said. "He told me when I rode in, said there's likely plenty more where this came from." Josephine stared at the nugget, then at Quentin. "You've spoken to Mr. Harrington," he nodded. "I went to your claim before coming to find you, wanted to see for myself." His eyes held hers steadily. "You're going to be a wealthy woman, Josephine. You can have any future you want, any man you choose." "I already know what future I want," she said softly. "And what man I choose." Quentin closed his hand around the gold nugget, his gaze never leaving hers. "I'm not an easy man, Josephine. I've lived rough for a long time. I have nightmares sometimes and habits that might be hard to break." "I'm not asking you to break anything," she said. "Just to bend a little, to make room for me." "I found you in the darkness," he said, echoing his words from 12 days ago. "You've been a light to me ever since." "Then stay," she whispered. "Stay and help me build something here, something lasting." He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. "I'll stay," he promised, "for as long as you want me." "That might be a very long time," she warned with a smile. Quentin Ellis, bounty hunter and soon-to-be Deputy U.S. Marshal, smiled back at the woman who had changed his life in the darkness of an abandoned mine. "I meant what I said when I found you, Josephine. I'll never leave." 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Josephine Zeller became Josephine Ellis in a simple ceremony in Tombstone's small church. The mine was producing well, with a small but dedicated crew working under the supervision of Mr. Harrington, the engineer who had confirmed her father's belief in the land. Quentin had taken the marshal's job, his territory covering Tombstone and the surrounding areas, which meant he could return home to Josephine most nights. They had purchased a small house at the edge of town, with a view of the desert and mountains beyond. On their wedding night, as they stood on the porch of their new home watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Quentin wrapped his arms around his bride from behind. "Happy," he asked, his breath warm against her ear. Josephine leaned back against him, content in a way she had never imagined possible when she was trapped in the darkness of that mine shaft. "Completely," she replied. "Are you?" Quentin turned her in his arms, looking down at her with an expression that still made her heart race after all these months. "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness again," he admitted. "You saved me, Josephine, in more ways than you know." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the scar along his jawline that she had come to love as much as every other part of him. "We saved each other," she corrected gently. "And we'll keep doing that every day." As he bent to kiss her beneath the vast desert sky, Josephine knew that whatever darkness might come in the future, they would face it together, the woman who had been abandoned and the man who had promised never to leave. And that was a promise she knew he would keep, until the end of their days.